Amen. All right. We are going to be starting about Joshua chapter 9. The letter of Joshua, the author is unknown. Some would say that Joshua wrote it, but there are other parts where it's pretty obvious he didn't write it. It's the way it's written and what's being said. But nevertheless, it's at least giving the Israelites a view of what things were like for their ancestors. Again, it's written in a contemporary style, but yet it was written for the descendants to understand that God had worked with their families and that God was involved in their conquering of the land, and that the land belonged to them because God had promised it to Abraham. Now, sometimes when we study the conquering of the land, some people raise some objections because God sounds like the word gets away from me right now, but he just arbitrarily says, you can have this land, I'm going to take it away from these other people. And that sounds unfair, but if you look into the text or into the people and what we're told about them, they were, number one, not worshipers of God, and they were, number two, a very wicked people. And so if God is going to bring vengeance on those who do not serve and follow him, then certainly he's got the right to do that in this life as well as in the life to come. And number two, it's God's world. He made it, he created it, he can do with it what he wants to. In effect, he makes the rules. So he promised the land because of Abraham's faith. And now the challenge for the Israelites is to attempt to live up to the faith of Abraham. Live up to the faith of your father and live up to the level that God would have you do to serve him. All right, chapter 9, question, the first verse we have marked there is verse 3. However, when the people of Gideon heard that what Joshua had done to Jericho and Ai, they resorted to a ruse, and they went as a delegation. So, obviously they didn't have the kind of communication we have today. So these people have heard what Joshua and the Israelites have been able to do to these other two cities, and they've gotten some communication about that. So what they decide to do is, let's send a delegation to make peace, make a treaty with Joshua and the Israelites. But we won't tell them who we are. And so look what they did to disguise themselves. They put on old clothes, they put on old shoes as if they had traveled from a great distance, and they were all dusty and dirty. And so they go to the Israelites and say, hey, we don't have a problem with you. We'd like to make peace with you. I don't know if you've got any questions about that. I've got a bunch of questions, that aren't going to be answered. But what do you think about their ruse? Yeah. Yeah. The worst that's going to happen to them in their effort is what's going to happen to them anyway. So why not take the risk? Yeah. And and this is where my questions start coming in. Why could God not whisper in Joshua's ear, says, hey, these people are fake? I don't know. There are times when it seems God is directly involved in what's going on, and then there are times when God apparently trusts on their faith. Now, he's already told them, conquer the land. So they should be geared for that. They should be thinking that, but instead they make a peace treaty. Anybody else got any comments? Yeah, yeah. They leaned on their own understanding instead of on God and what God had said. They were duped. They were tricked. There's no real indication here if they're seeking God's wisdom or information. They didn't go to God in prayer and say, Lord, what do we do with these people? Do we accept them at their word or what? Maybe at that point, God would have revealed something to them. Instead, they trusted more in themselves and their own wisdom, I guess we could say. All right, number 7, verse 7. Like they tried to inquire, didn't they? And so the people lied again. And here's an interesting thing to me, is they lied to the Israelites multiple times about who they were and where they lived and what their purposes and intentions were, and yet the Israelites still kept their treaty. When we enter into a legal contract today, we get the attorneys involved and all that stuff. And then if we find out somebody lied in the contract in order to get, what do? We take them to court. We say, this person made this contract under false pretenses. But the Israelites honored their contract.
But still, if one party is constantly lying about whatever, I would think that they would get to a point where they wouldn't trust them.
Yep, but in this case, it's too late, and they kept their word. That's the intriguing thing for me. But
You also have to consider the way the Israelites made those part of the statement. That if that statement was generally tied to a command that not take the name of the Lord in vain.
mm-hmm.
That applies to the other. We tend to think of that as each person. It has to do with when they made a testimony or an oath. It was an oath backed up by God.
Right. Typically today, when people talk about using the name of God in vain, they think of profanity and cursing, but that's not the point. That's not the hard truth. It's vowing that something is true or that you will do something and leaning on God's name as your support, your authenticity.
That's what Jesus talked about later on in the sermon. He said, you swear by the inheritance, this or that, and that. If you swear by the gift on the altar, you swear by the altar and the temple
And God.
dwells therein.
Yeah.
Back to the original command.
But it really wasn't about profanity. No. It certainly could have some application there, but for the most part, it's about keeping our word.
That's why, even though the other parties lied, the leaders of Israel kept their word.
Kept their oath.
Paul didn't give it
Yeah.
like this, but with
And it's going to cost some others too that are going to be just as deceptive. All right, good. Anyone else? All right, let's look down at verse 14. When the men of Israel sampled their provisions but did not inquire of the Lord, what are we talking about? Yeah. But still, as you mentioned, they're not calling on God, they're doing it themselves. We're going to check this out, and hey, their sandals were worn, their animals looked dusty and tired. So yeah, they probably came from a great distance. And by coming a great distance, it means they're not a part of the land that the Israelites were to conquer. So we'll make a treaty with you. We're not interested in you. You know, it'd be like if we were here, let's say this is the land of Israel and we were the Israelites and we come in and somebody shows up and they says, well, we're from Albuquerque. Well, that's outside of our district. That's way beyond where we want to go. And that's basically what happened here. All right. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that's the same group even, is it? Yeah. What was that verse? Verse 3? Yeah. Right. I can't answer the question. Other than the fact that, you know, we do sometimes use double names. Yeah. Maybe talking about a large area and a city. I don't know. Not on my geography that much. Might be like we might say Texans and El Pasoans. I don't know. Yeah, yeah. For me, the issue is God's given them the land. They're supposed to go in and take it by force. And they use their own judgment rather than talk to God about it. Because this was a time when they could talk to God in some way. God would let them have an answer, would give them an answer. But they chose to use their own wisdom, their own smarts. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's just business. That's the way people think. Yeah. But again, I've told this, I don't know if I've told it in here, but I know I've told you a couple of times. We had a young man that we were letting live with us, and he was working for the largest and fanciest furniture store in town. And he came home one time and he was just exhausted. And I said, why are you so tired? He said, I've been working all day changing prices on all the furniture. And I said, well, I know you're having a half price sale are you marking all the prices down? He said, no, we're marking the prices up so that when we can sell them for half price, it'll be the price we get for them all the time. So here was the most prestigious furniture store in town that was doubling the price of their products so that over the weekend, President's Day or whatever it was, they could have a half price sale. Yeah, corruption. These people are doing more than making a profit. They're saving their necks. So they go and basically lie, and the Israelites accept it. All right, verse 18. Because
the leaders of the congregation had sworn to them by the Lord, the God Israel, that all the congregation murmured against the leaders.
now, but they had sworn this oath to God, like Mike was talking about. They had sworn this oath to God. So we're not destroying you because of you. We're not destroying you because of our oath to God. So you got to admire that in them, even though we see a little stupidity as they got there. But nevertheless, they considered their pledge, their oath, sacred enough that they were not going to violate it. All right, good, thanks. All right, we have the next question sheet. Chapter 9, verse 22. Then Joshua summoned the Gideonites and said, why have you deceived us, saying we live a long way from you, while actually you're near us? And then? Yeah. So then he tells them, because of this, you are now under a curse. You will never cease to serve as woodcutters and water carriers for Israel, the house of my God. So they have become, in exchange for their life, basically what you might call indentured servants. They've got jobs or careers or whatever you would care to call it that's not going to really advance them economically. They're woodcutters and water bearers, which are hard jobs, and it's going to make it easier on the Israelites by having someone to do it for them. So even though they tricked Israel, they still had consequences to pay. Good. Anyone else? Traded their life for hard work. Yep. Yeah. Maybe not the best meal, but they didn't lose their lives, and they were still able to live. Anyone else? Right. And even though they were woodcutters, may have had an axe, they didn't have an army. So it wasn't like they were able to wage war against Israel. And by this time, numerically, they're pretty small in comparison. So they are, I don't necessarily want to call them citizens. I was going to say second-class citizens, but they're there in the kingdom of Israel, but they're not able to rise to any position of power or wealth as a consequence. All right, good. Anyone else? Yeah, they're kind of like indentured servants. They've got some freedom, but within limits. All right, chapter 10, verse 3. What's going on?
King of Israel asked other kings to come and help.
Yeah, but it wasn't necessarily of Israel, but he wanted to fight against Israel. More specifically, he wants to fight against the Gideonites because they made a treaty with the Israelites. So the assumption is they turned against us. They were our friends, but they wouldn't made a treaty. So it does show that there was some communication among these people, and they're hearing things, and they don't like what's happening. So it's they see it as we're being divided. So let us not divide. Let's unite together, and we'll start off by attacking the Gideonites, and maybe. I don't know that it says it this way, but maybe if we attack them, they'll say, no, wait, we're really on your side. So, but whatever, it doesn't work out. And then coming down in verse 7, Joshua marches up with his army. And verse 9, what happens? They go to a fight in a great battle. So what's important or unique about this battle? We don't understand what happened here. We don't know. We know what we're told. We can read. But the question is, how could that happen is not possible. As a simple illustration, if you're riding a bicycle or driving a car or some kind of vehicle, and you run into a solid brick wall, what happens? Yeah, you're going to be bummed up pretty bad. And right now, though it appears to us we are all sitting perfectly still, in reality, what's happening? The earth is spinning. The earth is moving. And so our earth is not only spinning, it's spiraling out here. It just keeps on going, and so is everything else. And what happens if you suddenly stop all that? The universe would crash, would collapse. So people who are unbelievers use this to attack your faith. And they talk about how in physically or physics it couldn't happen. Look at the laws of physics. It couldn't happen. Not going to go on. I don't know how God brought it about. I do know that God being God, he could do it. But I don't know how he did it. And you want to find a bunch of different confusing things, go to a half dozen different commentaries, unless they're just simply all parroting one another. You get ones with different points of view, and you'll find a whole bunch of different answers as to how this happened. But basically it says, sun stood still, and the Israelites continued to fight. However, this miracle happened. For me, there's two things. Number one, God was in control. Number two, he gave the Israelites the victory against what should have been an overwhelming enemy. But they caught them by surprise, and they fought them until they were no more. Anyone else want to share anything? Yep.
They weren't ready to fight, so they whooped up on their head.
Obviously, this worked. Interestingly enough, in the ancient time, wars were kind of like football games. We'll meet you on the field at 3 o'clock or 8 o'clock, whatever. But here, Joshua didn't use that tactic. And you were saying? Yeah. So they're beat up time the Israelites get there. Interesting. And what does that say to us? What does it say to the Israelites? They're reading this history about their people. Okay. Follow God's will and you'll be victorious. What else? Yes. And God is, I won't say handing them a victory, but it's obvious He's making sure they win. They're still having to do their share. They're having to fight the battle and etc. But God's making sure that it comes out in their favor. All right, great. All right, what's next? Yeah. And once they had destroyed the armies and captured the kings, they basically won the war. Now, as results, that means they didn't have to attack the cities. And one of the things that we notice as they're conquering the land, to a great extent, they did not destroy the cities. So what happened? What did the Israelites do? They just basically moved in. Yeah. It wasn't like they had to go build another house or build a wall. They were already there. They just took over what they had won in their victory from the enemy. All right, good. All right, let's see here. Yeah, verse 22. Verse 22 is, it's a command, it's an encouragement, it's a truth. Joshua says, you've seen what has happened in this battle. It's all going to happen that way. And that, of course, is the challenge that they had. Again, the book is written for the Israelites for generations to come. And the message is almost always the same. Be faithful to God. Do what God says. Obey God. As long as you do that, God will be with you, God will be on your side, and you'll be victorious. And even with those admonitions and those things of encouragement, the Israelites continued to struggle with their faith. Not because they're Jews, but because they're human. We have the same issue today in our lives. We read these stories, and then we start asking questions. Well, what's God going to do for me? You know, and we start trying to back God into a corner in some way. But again, faithfulness to the Word of God has always been the key to all of this victory. All right, verse 28. 31 is still talking about their battle and their victory. And down to 40. Now it says Joshua subdued the whole region, including the hill country. The hill country is going to be spoken of again. What's the point of mentioning the hill country? The hill country. Yeah, verse 40. Yeah. And their height gives them an advantage over you in the fight, in the battle. And secondly, what do you do with hill country? I mean, why did the early settlers in America love Kansas and Nebraska? Yeah, it's easy to farm. Well, these people are basically shepherds. So hills are not really something they're, interested in. But nevertheless, it becomes a valuable thing for them, in the future. But you run in and you capture the flat territory fairly easy, but the hill country is going to be more difficult. And why do we want it anyway? And when something is like that, your inclination is, why even try to get that? Let them stay up there and die. No, that's going to be for you as well. You need to take that land. But he again was victorious. Joshua was, and the Israelites. And Joshua says all these kings and lands were all conquered in one campaign because the Lord, the God of Israel, fought for Israel. And see, that's the message that's being passed on down for generations. You're here for a purpose. God's here for you. God's going to help you. Just like he helped your forefathers, your family. All right, I'm going to chapter 11, verse 4, unless someone's got something we want to share. All right, it has come to the point now where they basically defeated the southern tribes, and now they're moving north to the northern section. And this didn't all happen overnight. We read a few verses and we think, wow, that just happened real quick. Well, no, it was spread out. And the people at the north have seen what's happening. So they have come together, and it would appear to be a greater union. There was a few of the kings in the south that kind of band together, but now we're getting stronger as the northern boundaries are beginning to be approached. And verse 5, all the kings joined forces, and they were ready to fight against Israel. So the Lord said, do not be afraid of them, because by this time tomorrow I will hand them over to you, over to Israel. Now, if you're fixed to go into one of the biggest fights of your life, and God says, don't worry about it, we'll do it in a day. Those are pretty big words. And I know God has promised us that he will be with us, and he will answer our prayers, and he will help us in our fight. That faith gets weak sometimes. It's shaky, gets worrisome. There's a mighty big army out there, God. Mighty big army. All right. Verse 10, at that time Joshua turned back and captured Hazor and put its king to the sword. But because he had been the head of this United Nations, these united countries. And he was the head guy. So again, particularly in ancient times, when you captured the king or you killed the head of the army, that pretty much gave you victory. Unlike in situations today, though I have read and I've shared that one of the things that helped the American army against the German army, the Nazis, during World War II is when the Germans lost their commanding officer, they didn't know what to do. They just kind of sat there. Where in contrast, when the invasion, starting with D-Day, happened, you had American or Allied forces that were scattered out all over everywhere. Paratroopers were dropped miles away from where they were supposed to be, but yet they joined together. You know, I'm with Group B. Well, I'm with Group J, but we'd get together. You know, we didn't say, well, I can't take orders from you. I mean, you had groups of privates and maybe a corporal or a sergeant involved, and they were going out and fighting in the battle. Well, that's the difference by comparison to what we had back here. When Joshua killed the king, it pretty much ended the fight. Now, is there a lesson there for us? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes in life, as in business or a whole bunch of other things, we've got 10 or 12 things, 15 or 20 things that all need to be fixed. And sometimes we defeat ourselves almost by trying to fix them all at the same time. When maybe what we really need to do is decide what's the most important and work on that one thing. You got 15 things to do. Yeah, but this is the most important. So whether it be my life spiritually or whether it be the temptations that I'm fighting, whatever it is, we need to focus our attention and accomplish things in that way, rather than be so distracted and ended up being discouraged that we don't do anything. All right. Okay. Yeah, verse 13. Israel did not burn any of the cities built on their mounds except Hazor. So most of the cities weren't burned, which meant they could use them. I don't know how they chose who's going to live in which house, but as they moved in the cities, they simply took them over and they didn't have to build their own houses there. All right. Verse 16, Joshua took the entire land, the hill country, all of Negev, the whole region of Goshen, the western hills, everything. Took it all. And we see in the latter, or I guess in the middle of verse 17, Baal, that is one name that is sometimes used for one of their gods. Sometimes it'll be spelled differently. Sometimes it'll be B-A-E-L. Here is B-A-A-L. One of the things that they're defeating is not only the armies of wickedness, they're defeating the false religions that are there. Verse 20. Now, for it was the Lord himself who hardened their hearts to wage war against Israel, so that he might destroy them totally, exterminating them without mercy, as the Lord had commanded Moses. This command goes all the way back to Moses, and Moses has been dead for quite a while. And yet God is saying, these are wicked people and I want them destroyed. That's what you're going to do. And so they did. The question about hardening their hearts, I can't answer. I have some explanation for the plagues that came upon Egypt, and it says that Pharaoh's heart would be hardened. Well, I can understand in that because it sounds like God takes the plague away. You know, Moses says, okay, we'll take away this plague. And as soon as he did, then Pharaoh hardened his heart, which to me is illustrative of someone that's been backed into a corner and he forces, or he's basically forced to say, I surrender, okay, you can have it your way. And then when you release the pressure off of them, they say, I didn't mean it, and they want to come back again. They've hardened their hearts. Here, there doesn't seem to be any relief there. It just seems that God says these people deserve what they're getting. So let's make sure that they get the conviction and are convicted of their sin. Verse 23. So Joshua took the entire land just as the Lord had directed Moses. Now again, Moses has been dead for a long time, but yet, the Israelites are being directed back. This goes back to Moses, and it goes back to Abraham. So these books are not just history. They're faith directive. They're saying to the Israelites at any time in the history of their existence as God's people, that this is God's hand. He's done it through, he made a promise to Abraham. He told Moses what to do. Now Joshua is carrying it out, and it's all one thread. Brother Landon Saunders wrote a little book a few years ago where he talked about there's a thread, there's one message that goes through the Bible, and it's about the Messiah. And what is happening here is God is showing the Israelites how this thread is coming through, and eventually, as he promised Abraham, your seed will be a blessing to all the world. Now, they didn't always understand it like they should have, but nevertheless, God has a theme, God has a purpose, and God's working on that to make sure that it happens. So he gave the land as inheritance to Israel according to their tribal divisions, and the land had rest from war. So, basically he's saying you guys won. Anyone have any questions or comments? Chuck, I've got some questions for next time. I have one, thank you. I know when we study history, depending on who your history teacher was, high school or college, I haven't.
You started with 13 and not 12.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. Some history teachers have different approaches, different points of view. I had one history teacher one time that I didn't care for, and he was wanting us to memorize the dates in chronological order and know what happened here and what happened there. And I think in a book like Joshua, we can get hung up on that, like who were all the kings that were conquered and when did it happen and who did what. But history is intended for us to learn the lessons of history, not the dates and not the generals and not who won what battle. It's like, what lesson is to be learned out of this? And I think for the Israelites, the lesson is repeated again and again and again. It's simply follow God. And you see, when the Israelites did obey God, things went well. When they kind of pushed God over in the corner, didn't pay much attention to him, then all of a sudden they're making treaties with people who have been lying to them.
It's all through the Old Testament.
It's all through because it's human nature.
Especially Judges.
And that's what we struggle with is, do you want to be able to quote history and name the dates, for the last 5,000 years? Or do you want to draw the important lessons from history?
We have the same problem today.
Yeah.
If you don't learn from history, you're condemned to repeat
Yeah, somebody said that. Who was that? You mean before you said it? Yeah. Yeah. Because, again, it's our human nature. And which is one of the interesting things to me about every generation, not this generation, that's just now coming into their adulthood, but every generation thinks they're smarter than the past one. And if we don't study our history, then we're going to make the same mistakes our parents made and our grandparents made and think, how'd this happen? Because you didn't know your history. You didn't listen to your mom and dad and your grandparents when they told you about the mistakes they made. So, Israel, same issue. So, our lesson for next week will be memorize chapter 12. No, we'll go on with the questions. Thank you for your participation.